So the Christmas star, we're going to be talking about that today. So in a sense, that's, in one way of looking at it, that's the star that we put at the top of every Christmas tree every year. The tree would be pretty incomplete without it. And for Christians, that star represents the Star of Bethlehem, right? The bright light in the sky that supposedly led the Magi from the east to the birthplace of Jesus way back when. So, the Magi, or the wise men, as you may know, were the astronomers of the day. They were very knowledgeable about celestial events. They studied the movement of the planets and the constellations, and very often used that knowledge to foretell future events. You see, in those days, astronomy and astrology were intertwined. They thought more holistically, more using both sides of the brain. They didn't see it as cut and dry as science does today, for better or for worse, depending upon how you look at it. So that event in particular, right? The bright light in the sky, the Star of Bethlehem, that glowing object, was for them an indication of the location of the birth of the prophesied new leader of the Jewish people, right? The Christ, or the Messiah. So, modern day astronomers tell us that what may have been that Star of Bethlehem, that brilliant glowing object in the sky, could have been Halley's Comet. According to their calculations, they think that Halley's Comet came around about that time, actually about 10 years after that, but biblical times were not so accurate. It also could have been a supernova of a distant star, or it could have been a great conjunction of Saturn and Jupiter, right? Which many of you have heard is an event that's happening again this year, in fact, tomorrow, on the winter solstice. Now, this is when two of the largest planets in the solar system, Saturn and Jupiter, come so close together. They're perfectly aligned with each other that it appears to us as if it's one giant glowing light in the sky. It's actually very exciting. It's the biggest thing that's happened in astronomy in a while. Now, Jupiter and Saturn they line up about every 20 years. That's called a conjunction. But this is when they get so close and they're perfectly aligned, like 0 degrees difference. They're so perfectly aligned that it's one gigantic bright light. That's called a great conjunction. And it happens only once every 400 years. So the last time that this celestial event happened was 1623. And if you go back 400 years before that, and then 400 years before that, and et cetera, you keep going back, you adjust for leap years and all of that, you sort of end up at year 0. So it could have very well been the Great Conjunction. So let's look at, the last time that this happened, 1623, what did it foretell then? What was going on at that time? Well, early 1600s, we were well out of that very dark time, appropriately titled the Dark Ages. By the time that glowing thing happened in the sky, we were well into the Renaissance, which is, as you know, a time of cultural and artistic and philosophical and economic rebirth, right? So good stuff, right? That was a good time. 1600s, though, was also the time that Africans were kidnapped from their villages and forcibly brought to the American colonies and sold into slavery. So, it's like you have this real brilliant light, this intense light and intense darkness. So what will the great conjunction of 2020 mean for us, if anything? Or is it purely an astronomical event? Well, it depends on how we look at it, right? Are we seeing things purely scientifically? Or do we want to see it maybe more holistically, using both sides of our brain, the logical scientific side and the more poetic, meaning-making side? We humans have always been meaning-making beings. We look at life and we try to find the meaning, right? We see metaphor. It's how we make sense of life. And it's sometimes how we communicate. It's definitely how we tell stories. It's one of those things that separates us from the animal kingdom. And it's a beautiful quality that we all possess. Of course, like anything, it can lead us astray. I mean, if we're looking at a tortilla and we see the face of Jesus, and we think that tortilla factory is now the holiest shrine, and maybe we've taken it too far. So we definitely want to use discernment, our power of discernment, which is found in the power of wisdom, right? One of our 12 powers that we all have within us, the power of wisdom found at our core. It's a sort of the gut knowing. Now, it is remarkable that this great conjunction, again, once every 400 years, is happening on the winter solstice. I mean, of any day of the year for this to happen, on the winter solstice, the darkest day of the year, the brightest light on the darkest day. Maybe there's some meaning to be had there. And, truthfully, we've been through a pretty dark time, right? It's been, this year in particular, pretty dark, pretty challenging for a lot of people worldwide. But next year promises to bring some relief. We're talking about the vaccine. People are already getting the vaccine that promises to end this collective nightmare, this worldwide pandemic. Next year brings with it new leadership that could possibly bring about the healing of the soul of America. That's the promise, right? That's the promise, the bright light of promise in the midst of darkness. So perhaps the great conjunction of 2020 will bring with it the promise of peace, of kindness, of compassion, of caring for one another, of caring for the planet, of awakening to oneness, of awakening to oneness. And it may not happen overnight. It may not come with trumpets glaring and fireworks bursting in air or a light as bright as the Star of Bethlehem. But it will be the promise of bright light in the midst of darkness. It will be. So, astrologers, different astrologers are saying different thing about this. Some astrologers are saying that this great conjunction initiates an age of divine order. It's good. Right? We can all use a little more divine order, right? But I think it's even more interesting as they're saying these are the two biggest planets in our solar system, and they are having this great conjunction in the constellation of Aquarius. So this big event happening in Aquarius, they're saying, is a huge awakening of awareness. The awakening of awareness of who we truly are, divine and human, which, we in Unity, we already know that. In fact, we more accurately state it as we are divine beings expressing in a human dimension. But wow, wouldn't it be amazing if more and more people began to awaken to that awareness? Imagine what that would be. Just imagine. Ultimately, this will be what we decide it'll be, what we as co-creators choose it to be, right? And are willing to work toward what we're willing to work toward. So